time is now 5:10 p.m. This meeting has been duly posted, and we have a quorum. Good evening, and welcome to the Superintendent's Evaluation Ad Hoc Committee meeting of the Dallas Independent School District Board of Trustees. Please stand and join us for a moment of silence and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and a salute to the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. I'd like to recognize the ad hoc committee members that are present tonight. Trustee Ben Mackey to my right, Trustee Carla Garcia to my left, and I'm Dan Mitchkay, the committee chair. We are also joined by our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Michael Hinojosa. Trustees, we're on to item number 3 of the agenda, which is discussion of the Superintendent of Schools Evaluation Instrument and 2019-20 targets. Do we have a presentation?
We actually have modified the incentive plan, but I'd like to start with the actual evaluation if possible.
Okay.
Yeah. And I believe everyone has one in front of you. And so I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of changes since the last time the evaluation committee met. Since then, Chief Elizalde presented goals, the district goals, to the board, and the board agreed to have the middle school goal, and then we were going to take out the extracurricular goal. We also talked about expanding middle grades to not just be 7th and 8th grade, but 6th through 8th. And so if you, not on this one. And so if you look at the second page of the evaluation, you'll see goal 5 is reflected with those changes. There's one other change that I want to bring to your attention, and that is goal 4, and it's KPI 4.2. I met with Dr. Oakley, and we needed to make a correction. What I brought to you last week was 1.1% for the 2018-19 school year, and it really should be 0.8. So you see that is reflected, that change is reflected. And then the points have also been reflected and modified. So those are the 2 changes that we've brought forth based on the discussion from the last board meeting and our evaluation meeting. So from there, we'll take any questions or comments.
Just one clarification, and it's really just for the record. When you said the board decided to go with the middle school grades versus the old extracurricular activity goal that we previously had. I think that was the consensus from the discussion, but there was not a vote on that.
Correct. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Trustees, any questions? Trustee Mackey.
I have 2 quick ones. So on goal 3, these all mention new. I don't know, maybe I just missed that when you just addressed it right now. What was the new part on goal 3?
There wasn't. It was goal 5. So goal 5.
So this document does say new on goal 3, at least the one that I have.
Oh, no, it's just new to the goals. So goal 3 came with HB3, and so we just put new because it's new. It wasn't on his evaluation last year.
I got you. Okay, the changes happened in goal 5 and in goal 4.
Correct. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. On goal 5, I know when we talked about it at the board level at the last meeting, there was a push to also consider, along with going 6 through 8, also consider other types of achievement. So these two are the state assessment ones. Did we look at, and are we talking about bringing something like, I know we talked about MAP or other things for the middle grades? If so, where would they fit in here?
So we are bringing forth a recommendation for MAP to be included in our district goals. That is not a recommendation we're bringing for the superintendent's evaluation based on the fact that we have never utilized that before. So we don't have any historical data.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Trustee Garcia, any questions, comments?
Can you just define quickly what that change was from 1.1 to 0.8 for the 2018-19 school year?
Right. Sorry about that. So in actually looking at the 2018-19 results, the results truly were 0.8% as opposed to 1.1. So it was just an error in reporting that result.
Okay, that just being the baseline to start off this year.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes,
I just want to add, so thank you, Dr. Lear, for sending me the other evaluations. I know I asked a lot of questions about the clearly superior, but when you look at the actual scores and how difficult it is to get that, I think that has cleared up a lot of questions for me. I think if we do revisit and talk about that, I think that's definitely something for next year, given the fact that we are 6 months in. And that was Dr. Hinojosa's point last time. I think that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sending those. That brought a lot of clarity.
Sure.
Okay, I guess a couple of points. One is that this appraisal instrument, and if we do move and to approve this, we'll need the motion to say that it's subject to corresponding changes that the board might make in the goals. So we need to, or conforming changes, I guess is a better way to say it. There was the only other items of discussion on the instrument itself that I recall, and I just bring them up so that if anybody wants to comment further on them, related to stakeholder satisfaction. We got some comments from some trustees that they thought the Board of Trustees portion of the stakeholder satisfaction should be higher. And then the other one related to whether or not we should add a survey of principals, given their importance in the system to get that further input. And trustees, any discussions on those points? Trustee Mackey?
I'm happy to jump in because I was the one that brought up the idea of a survey of principals. I still think that that's a really strong idea. Whether or not it belongs in this evaluation at this time, given we're 5 months into the school year, I can be open to. I think it's a conversation that we need to have at some point. A climate survey is used at so many levels for so many different things. So I would like that facilitate just a conversation of principles or just other things to kind of get the whole sense where it makes sense. I don't know if it necessarily makes sense in this evaluation at this time, and I think as we consider that. So that was my thoughts on that.
Okay, you'd at some point like to figure out a way to get some additional feedback from principals.
Absolutely. I think especially as things like I mentioned theory of action, like those type of things, what that looks like, whether it's in here, whether it's in the climate survey, whether it's in anywhere, I think I'd like to have that conversation further. But again, I could see where this may or may not make sense here, especially not at this time.
Okay. Any other? Yes, Trustee Garcia.
Question just going back to KPI 4.3 on goal 4. The participation would also, that would mean the student finishes the course of whichever of these categories they participate in. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, let me ask for a further clarification on that. Participating in those courses, is participating and passing, is that the intent? Taking the course and passing the course as opposed to taking the course and failing the course, right?
It doesn't include what their grade is in the course. It does mean they complete the course or they're in the course, but to be differentiated from the fact that being in an AP course is still different from then taking an AP exam. Being in an IB course and then taking those are two different metrics, while certainly related. That's not what this is first about increasing participation so that we also don't just cream. I mean, part of this is to ensure that we are being equitable and not selecting students that will perform only at the highest level for those metrics.
Right. No, I understand that,
Okay.
the general purpose of that metric, and I think it's a laudable purpose to get more kids involved. My only question was technically, the word participating, does that mean passing the course, completing the course, or just enrolling in the course?
It really means enrolled in the course.
Okay.
They could,
They can enroll and then drop
They
out of the
could
course?
drop out.
And
They
they would still
could.
count as,
and they would count in this initial, they would.
okay. Well, let's just keep an eye on that.
Sure.
I'd like to
We can
to
always
see
then
how many
separate
how many
bring you
changes
what the
we-
attrition
we
is later
have.
on.
Okay.
May I speak, though, earlier to Trustee Mackey's comment mentioning about principal survey, just for a different perspective, if I may? I just want to reiterate, of course, we think voice is very important. Principals do, as Trustee Mackey probably recognizes, principals do respond to a survey to their immediate supervisors. And ultimately, I just want to make sure the board recognizes that the principal's voice would probably be more reflective of maybe my performance in terms of who their interactions are on a day-to-day basis. So maybe just as we think futuristically, what would that survey look like to be different from the survey that they currently participate in, which is really about school leadership, their executive director, deputy chief, and the chief of schools. So just from the lens of the person who works more on a day-to-day basis.
And thank you for that. I think, yeah, we can connect about that and what that could look like. I think it's a valuable thing because you're right, because when we have it set up by feeder pattern or whatnot, that changes the dynamics of the overall system and culture and all of that, which I would like to see us get to and have an idea about that. So we can connect about that and where that might make sense later on or how we do that as a district. Going back to this, I would like to, I don't know if that's something worthwhile. I mean, the participating and unenrolling sounds like something that's not a laudable piece if they don't finish the course, et cetera. I would like to make a push that at least that is participating and completing that course. Because all these are year-long courses as well. And, again, I think that's something we might have an idea on, et cetera.
We pull it from the end of the year, so they're enrolled at the end of the year. They've been participating the whole time. So at the end.
Okay, so this
yeah.
is not how many have just enrolled in the course. This is how many have enrolled and finished the course.
Yes, since we're looking at it at a certain point in time, and at the end of the year, if they're still in there, that's who we're counting.
Okay.
'Cause it's at
So
the-
it's
in
not who
May.
enrolled at the beginning.
Yeah,
and-
it's at the
okay.
end.
Okay, that makes it a little bit better. I would like to see us eventually, whether it's this year or next year, if we're going to continue this, think about how many of them are taking the end of course assessment, whether they're AP, IB, et cetera. How many are earning those rates from that, et cetera. But there's demonstrated value to being in an AP course, regardless of what you do on the exam, does improve your college GPA on average. So I see there's value in that. But I would like to see us move in that direction eventually if we're going to continue to talk about that as a KPI.
Okay, I think that's fair. And for both Trustee Mackey and Trustee Garcia, this is your first year on the board. And I appreciate the fact that you're willing to see how the historic instrument works. But next year you will have, I think, more background and in terms of being ready to propose some changes that, that might be more significant than the ones that we've already discussed. With respect to stakeholder satisfaction, my personal opinion on that is to leave it at the 4 points and just monitor that to see if we've got a real strong feeling. I don't get the sense that that is the prevailing view of the board to change it. But if it is, we can change it next year, and as a matter of fact, it can actually be changed when we take this instrument to the full board. The full board is going to have to approve this, and I don't know if it's posted yet, but the tentative plan is to have a meeting on is it Thursday, November 21st at 3 p.m. to discuss the superintendent evaluation and the appraisal instrument and the incentives. So, so if you get any additional feedback from any of our colleagues and you want to press that point, there's still an opportunity for us to discuss that and other changes. So at this point, I will entertain a motion with regard to the approval of the Superintendent of Schools evaluation instrument.
I move that we approve the Superintendent of Schools evaluation instrument in 2019-2020 targets. Actually, pause. Before I do that, are we going to go over the incentive? Were there any changes to the incentive plan before we do that?
Yes, we worked on market share.
Yeah, I would prefer to take them separately and
Okay.
get this one.
I got you.
back.
All right. So, well, then I move to approve the Superintendent of Schools evaluation instrument to the full board for adoption.
Is there a second?
And targets, right?
Yes.
These are the targets?
Correct.
And targets.
I second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Trustees, is there any discussion? If there's no discussion, we will vote by raising our right hands. All in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Okay, motion carries 3-0. Okay, we'll move to the incentives. I wanted to see if,
Sure.
yeah, okay. So
Trustee Mishke, did you want us to go over incentive 1, 2, and 3 again? The last time we met, there was a lot of discussion around market share. And so that's probably the only slides that are different than last time.
Okay, well, let me make a couple of comments first, because I did get some input from Trustee Marshall, and I just wanted everybody to be aware of his position. And of course, the incentive plan is something the full board is going to have to vote on. So since we're having this committee meeting, I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to discuss it but before we send anything to the board. So he stated to me that his views were that there should be 7 incentives. The first five of them should match our goals. And of course, our goals, the way when you look at the instrument, the goals are 4 or 5 years out, but there are KPIs that have points attributed to them. So it essentially is saying that the first 5 incentives should be based on achieving next year's KPI for that particular goal. And then he further stated that he thought the market share goal and the 0 F schools goal or incentives were the ones that he would put in there. Now, I assume we will have a longer discussion about this at that 3 p.m. meeting on November 21st, but I wanted to give the committee members and the administration the opportunity to discuss that alternative. And Dr. Hinojosa, I'll open that up to you if you'd like to comment. If you want to reserve comment, that's fine too.
I'm not inclined to be supportive of that idea. The performance incentives from my recollection of the discussion is that they needed to be bigger and bolder and more rigorous, and these are just our annual targets. So that's not in line with what I thought I was agreeing to on the contract, except for the ones on the 0F schools, and depending on what this subcommittee does on the market share. Those two I would agree to. The others, I don't feel comfortable agreeing to those.
Okay, and just as a point of clarification, I'll indicate that the way the appraisal instrument works is that there are a certain amount of points attributed to each one of those goals. And if the superintendent reaches certain designated levels of an aggregate total of points, there is a base salary, base compensation raise attributed with, if I get these numbers wrong, I'm sorry, I think it is 70 to 79 points, it's a 1% raise, and 80 to 89 is a 2% raise, and 90 to 99 is a 3% raise, and if it's over 100, it would be a 4% raise in base salary. So there is a compensation element that is built into the instrument, which includes the 5 goals. And again, to just relate a well-reasoned and thought-out opinion from one of our colleagues, his view was that's not enough emphasis on the 5 district goals, and it's not consistent with the way incentive compensation would work for CEOs in other areas. So I bring this out for any further discussion. Trustee Mackey, do you have any comments or questions?
I do. I can see it both ways. I can see it to Dr. Hinojosa's point that meeting the goals that we're aiming to do is part of the job, and that's what we're aiming to achieve, and that's what we should be doing. We should see the achievement. That's not a bonus achievement goal. That is really performance-based. I can also see Trustee Marshall's point around that those are the 5 most important things that we said we as a district were going to do, and that's what needs to be echoing at every level. My addition would be, I think, my first thought is to side with Dr. Hinojosa's thought on that. If we did move towards having the 5 district goals be part of the incentive plan, my push would be that those targets be like at the clearly superior or above like next year's, so like 2 years worth of growth in 1 year. That to me is much, I think, like what the heart of that should be. Those are my 2 thoughts on that, but I think I side with Dr. Hinojosa's point on making these really challenging and achievable also. So, but I could see it either way.
Any questions or comments, Trustee Garcia?
Yes, I mean, taking a look at the goals that we have right in front of us, I mean, they all directly feed one way or another into those 5 district goals that we've set or could be setting soon. So echoing the comments about these to me seem to be in line in achieving in another broader way, getting towards the same metrics, supporting the KPIs in and of themselves. That's all.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to the incentives that we have previously discussed, and there are 4 of those that we've previously discussed. Incentive 1 is the, thank you for putting it up there, 73% of seniors in early college, high schools, and PTech will graduate with an associate's degree. We have the backup data showing that is a challenging goal. National average is 20%, and we're looking at 73%. questions, comments on that?
The one push I had last time was around, you could word this either way. I think when you look at just seniors, you're looking at people who have made it through 3 years of that program and are just there now. So there are some people that have been lost through attrition that are not counted in that. And so my preference on this would be to be something like what we see here is the percentage of seniors across the district achieving an associate's degree by the time they graduate improves. That would be my preference. I know I mentioned that last time. I'm just curious, administration's thoughts. I'm sure you took that back and thought about it and decided which way to go. I'm curious of the thoughts of where we're at now.
Well, the challenge with that is that not every school has the same number of seats even to begin with for a pathway that would lead to an associate's degree. So some of the schools have smaller, so when you, even smaller as a percentage of the whole campus. Take, for instance, Spruce. Spruce is a fairly large campus, yet it only has maximum, I think, like 48, 49 seats, that even if 100% of them as a percentage of that school. So we would, that would not be my recommendation, but we would certainly, at superintendent's directive, can work numbers.
So I guess like this slide right here that you have up right now, associates degree acquisition across the district, correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption with this is that if we did what was on the last slide, this is what it would look like as far as, so if we achieved 73% of seniors achieving associate's degree, it would be the same as, based on our estimates, et cetera, going from 3.1% to 7.9% of the entire district senior class. Am I saying that correctly, that those two are essentially, if we did those, and they're the same?
Let me weigh in on this
Yeah.
one. I would not object to this next year, but this year was our first year of 8 schools that are significantly, our 8 toughest schools, where we took a big risk and said, we're going to start this program. And I've been challenging those principals at those schools. I've only been talking about the kids who are eligible to get that. By next year, we'll have those 8 schools already through the whole pipeline, and then we'll have the other 10 coming on. I think if we said this from the beginning, that next year it's going to be based on all the seniors and to take into consideration the attrition, because your attrition is a good point. But when I started talking to those high school principals this year, I didn't talk about the kids that are already gone. I talked about the kids that they have serving right now. And so we need to have a bucket for attrition because we don't want kids to pull out. So that's just my only comment on that. Next year, I would feel much more comfortable because then I'll start talking about that right now for the following year as a metric. And so someone said, where did you come up with this number, 73%? I said, it's the opposite of 37%, because someone told me 37% of the kids graduate with an associate's degree who are in early college programs. It was actually 20-something. So, the goal was much higher. And that's what that's what I've been talking to the principals. That's what Brian Luss has been talking to the principals. That's what Stephanie and her team have been talking to the principals about. Now we're going to change at the last minute and say, okay, now let's take into consideration attrition rates. And so it's just hadn't been on the conversation. It's a very good caution about attrition. It's just not been in our conversations.
If I may, and it's really 2 different metrics, because you're looking at kids that may have just moved or changed completely. It's not for them. And we are monitoring the attrition in our evaluation report. And so we're looking at who started and are they getting the hours. And so we're doing that on the side, but it would be very difficult to really get that denominator. They could have died. They could have left the state, so it would be 2 different metrics.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think, Dr. Hinojosa, your point is clear. I do think next year, especially if we continue on this path, that we think about and talk about the attrition rate as that. But you're right, if we hit this, that's a high percentage rate regardless. So I'm okay with seeing that stay this year. I was just curious about that background. I would love to see that conversation about attrition continue in all programs, AP, IB, all the way down.
And I think that's a very appropriate caution. But let us just work towards that for next year to take, it actually will help me with attrition and keeping things. But it's just a new conversation we really haven't had with them. So.
Well, yeah, I would like to underscore that point about attrition, and even though I don't get the feeling that there's a consensus on this committee to make any changes from the original proposal, at least this year. But I always worry about the fact that the 9th grade class is so much bigger than the 12th grade class, right? And if you wind up with, if you have 100 kids starting and 50 of them leave the program, you've got 50 left and 40 of them graduate, then is your success rate 80% or is it 40%? And I'd like to make sure that we are tracking both of those numbers. Trustee Garcia, any comments or questions on this proposed incentive?
Question on the projected growth of the additional number of students that would be coming into early college high schools and PTECs for the next school year.
Yeah, I wish Brian was here, but he has those numbers off the top of his head. But next year, we're going to be adding 10 schools that'll be seniors. So, and those schools, they were in cohort 2. So typically, they have between 100 and 125.
Right.
And so if you take 10 times 100,
Right.
now we're going to have, significant larger numbers. And so eventually, what my target was that 20% of the senior class, when we started this journey, we started this journey, just to show you how stark it was, 15% of our students got some kind of credential 6 years after graduating from high school. Next year, I'd love for us to be between 15 and 20% of our graduating seniors get get an associate's degree before they leave the high school. And so that's a huge jump. But, so we're going to have 10 more schools being part of this base next year. Go to the next slide, and you'll see what it looks like in other districts. So we're going to be we're going to be at 15%, I think, at a minimum. My hope is to go to 20%. But then you see what the others are having in other districts, and it shows that it's not even close. But and very few, some of those are starting P-TECH, but they're 2 years behind us. When you look at the national average of how many kids actually graduate, this is the reality right now in the last 2 years, in the last 2 cohorts. Stephanie or Pam, anything else from our conversations with Brian and Osama?
Just a clarifying question then. When it says our percentage of graduates, so we're saying that of the 197 students that graduated with an associate's degree in 2018, that represented only 2.4% of the senior class for that year?
Correct.
So if we look back at the previous slide, if we meet the 73% graduating with an associate's degree, that would equal 7.9 of the total senior class.
Correct. Pam, this is why I did not want to use this slide to confuse going apples to oranges, to apples to green apples. And so now we're just confusing. I don't know what this represents, to be honest with you.
So this slide represents, we have an estimate of 8,500 students. You see that off to the side? And so we're projecting 668 we're projecting that 668 students will achieve their associate's degree.
Okay, I think I get it
So
now.
actually, if you so if you go to this slide, this actually represents, you see the 177 and the 197. And so if I go back for just a second, you see the same 2 numbers there reflected in 2017 and 2018.
And that's lag data.
Correct. Correct. So then what we're saying here is as we move forward, we would end up, so the answer is actually, I don't know that it corresponds to necessarily this, but if we do get the number of students that we're projecting, we should be now overall close to 8% in going from where we were currently. But that's of the entire senior class.
That makes sense.
And you would see that no other district even comes close to 8% or even 7% with and none of them have any in the pipeline. I guess the other point I want to make, none of these other districts have in the pipeline where there's a whole other cohort that will be ready to graduate.
But by definition, you can't get an associate's degree if you're part of the senior class unless you're in one of these programs.
Correct.
Well, I'm just going to offer an opinion. I found that slide and that additional data point a good reality check. It was another way to figure out, you know, how effective and how big the program is compared to other districts. And, you know, I realize that they all don't easily tie together, but it does show us that how we are, you know, more than doubling, almost tripling the number of kids who are obtaining, you know, this degree. So I think it is helpful, and I you know, would encourage you to give us different data points. Maybe just introduce them and saying this doesn't exactly tie to the previous slide, but it is another reality check on how we're doing. So, okay, let's move to incentive number 2. Propose decrease the number of F schools to 0.
I think it's clear, meaningful, and I'm sure Trustee Marshall will love it. No, but I think this is a really meaningful goal. I mean, if we could do this, that's huge, especially for a large urban district. I also appreciate its simplicity.
Trustee Garcia? Yes, Dr. Enos.
There is one slight caveat that will be handled in the next few months. Because right now the commissioner has interpreted the state law to say that if you're a D twice, you're an F. So we're counting that if any of our schools that are a D now are a D again, they're going to be an F. So therefore, we won't get it. There is some debate about whether that's what the law says. In fact, there was a committee, the House Public Ed Committee had a hearing on this a few months ago, so there may be some interpretation about whether, but to us, regardless of whatever the rules are, we want no F schools. And if it's a double D that's an F, we don't want any of those. So that's our standard. I just wanted to be for full disclosure that there may be some litigation or there may be some interpretation of whether a double D is an F or not. So Stephanie, anything you want to add to that?
I did want to just clarify that from a practitioner standpoint, that meant that if we had a school that had a 61 and is a D currently and gets to a 69 and is a D, that was the question I asked Cecilia, and the response up to this point was it didn't matter. That was still going to be considered a D twice, and therefore by default would be an F.
And I had heard that it would be the sanctions would be what the F schools are, and you're saying that they would be actually labeled F, so that's a different, okay.
Okay, so what we put in our incentive, we can do it one of, I guess, 3 ways. We could say that there will be no Fs, not counting double Ds. We can say there'll be no Fs counting double Ds, or we can say there'll be no Fs however the Texas Education Agency comes down on the question, or however the lawsuit comes down.
I think to Trustee Mackey's point, go back to the previous slide. That is very clear. So whatever the rules are, let's go with that. Whether the rules change or they're litigated, whatever the standard is, we want 0 Fs. Now, next year, this is going to say, Stephanie, 0 Fs and 0 Ds. So we'll just keep ratcheting up the bar. So whatever the rules are, we'll follow whatever the rules are in place when it becomes official. That's very clear and simple.
Okay, and I wanted to get that out on the record because we need to be very clear what our document says. So decrease the number of F schools to 0 as determined by state law, something like that, as measured by state law. Okay, incentive number 3. This matches up to, specifically to one of our KPIs, right? Under, was it student outcome? Number, is it,
Is it 4? It actually matches up on our goals.
oh, on the goal itself? Okay.
Here it is. What's this one? Oh, no, that's takes, right. Oh, I must have taken it off. You know what, it doesn't align exactly with the goals.
It's the combination of the reading and the math,
Yes.
correct?
Actually,
This one-
there's,
Sorry, go ahead.
there's an overlap in multiple areas, to Trustee Mackey's point. But, so first, of course, we do have African-American student achievement identified under our goals as a GPM 1.2 that we're bringing to the board. But that includes all levels, right? Approaches, meets, and masters. This is a specific focus on meets. And so then when you do see in goal 2, specifically, we talk about meets, and in goal 2, it's reading meets, and in goal 3, it's math meets. And there you do, I mean, it's a specific grade, but the focus nonetheless is on African-American students as a GPM 2.1 and a new GPM of 3.1. So there's overlap in at least 3 areas
Okay.
tied directly to this particular incentive.
And Dr. Lear, didn't we get this data from Taper?
We did,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, yeah, I see your point, Dr. Elizalde. It seems to me that if we were going to exactly match it, we'd probably have it as KPI 1.4, right? Okay.
And just, and I know we had this discussion last time on this. If I remember correctly in the slides last time on this, this is actually, so our goal around African-American achievement at meets is roughly like up by, I think it's like 2 or 3 percentage points. And this one, if I remember correctly, is doubling that. That's double the growth of the normal. And so I just want to make that as a point, which is one of the reasons I find this very compelling, this one. And if the discussion moves to talk about these goals as part of the incentives, I think this is a good example of what it would look like if that was the direction, to be something that's double or like extra achievable, or sorry, extra
Hard to achieve.
hard to achieve in that. So that's just my note on that.
Okay, Trustee Garcia, you good with this? No comment, okay. All right, let's move to the question of market share. And I'll start out on this because Dr. Lear and I have had conversations about this particular issue, and the latest thing that I put out there was to measure market share growth by comparing the percentage of Dallas ISD students to the total percentage of Dallas ISD students, or the total amount of Dallas ISD students plus students in charter schools in Dallas ISD. A couple of reasons why I suggested that. One of them is that it is the charter schools that have been taking the biggest increases in market share. We have a lot of people in the market, a lot of the institutions in the market. We have schooling, we have private schools, but the biggest share of the market that is competition for us seems to be the charter schools. So the second point about this is it's easily measurable. We can easily measure charter school enrollment and Dallas ISD enrollment, add the two together, and then figure out whether our percentage, DISD percentage, went up or went down. The third thing is that, personally, I would like to encourage us to play this game of competition a little bit tougher than historically we have and historically other large urban districts have. I've said several times over the past couple of years, we're like the sleeping giant, and they come in with these surgical attacks, and the charter schools come in, and they gain market share. And I think you have a chart as background here showing that the charter schools have increased their market share over time. Right, and while we have, they've actually increased their total enrollment, while our total enrollment has declined. So while I realize that this suggestion that I'm making as a way to measure market share, it's not perfect. It doesn't touch the private school aspect. It doesn't touch the homeschool aspect, but it does get us focused on what appears to have been our biggest competition over the last several years. And it does really, I think, put in place a spotlight on, what are we doing? Are we doing everything we can to deal with this? And if we can increase our market share vis-a-vis the charter schools, I think that would be a really big deal. Most, if not all, of the other urban districts that we've looked at haven't been able to do that. Charter schools are eating into them, and they have advantages that we don't have. They can pinpoint where they're going to put the schools, and they can, they have greater funding. So we are at a disadvantage, but the advantage we do have is that most charter schools are underperforming Dallas ISD, and we've got to reach parents and make sure that they understand that that Dallas ISD is outperforming most of the charter schools that are within our market. Anyway, so my intent on doing this was to focus on charter school competition, come up with something that is easy and measurable, and put some real attention on something that we and other urban districts have not been very successful in changing. So that would, I'll just ask my colleagues for their thoughts on this and ask the administration to comment as well.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts. So I just want to just summarize that in general. So for A, which is just team snapshot to team snapshot.
And just to clarify, it's October
October,
snapshot.
yep. Yep, October snapshot, that's right. Will be at or above what it is currently. The downfall to this one I can see is that if just a whole bunch of kids move into the district, the numbers could go up everywhere. We could meet it without doing anything tangibly different. But why I really do like this one is A, it's clear and simple, and B, we have had a persistent trend of lower and lower and lower enrollment for at least all of the years on this thing. And so just by virtue of being at that same level or above it again would be a big win, period. So I really like that one because there's a consistent trend that we're putting a stop to. 4B, which tries to take in all market share, I think the downfall of that one is that that's not an exact percentage. We don't really know. And so we're kind of guessing at our best estimates and data, et cetera. So it's not a perfect estimate. So that's a downfall there. It does take into account private school and homeschool and all of that. The thing that is not compelling to me about this one's kind of been, it's gone up for 3 years and then down for a year. So we're not really like putting a stop to a trend on this one with this. I think it's meaningful, but I think where this gets difficult is really getting that number right on. And then for C, I want to not like it because I want there to be private and homeschool piece, but I think Trustee Michike, your points, I think, are meaningful here. The other thing that I really like about this is another one with a consistent trend that we put a stop to. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, literally up by a point each year. I do think that's a powerful thing. I do have a question for Cecilia or somebody. On this one, I think the reason we had this conversation about charter school and Dallas IC is because those are known numbers, correct? Charter enrollment, Dallas, like there's no estimation about this share?
Yes, they are. They are known.
Are these charter market share, are those only kids within our Dallas ISD boundaries? Can we
Correct.
know that?
Correct. So, I mean, we can do both ways, but this represents Dallas ISD students.
Okay. When you say Dallas, you mean students who
Or,
live
I'm sorry,
in-
students who live within the Dallas ISD
Gotcha.
board.
So we can get data from the state and understand where their students are coming from, whose district they're going from, and it's an exact number to know how many kids in our boundaries are going to charter schools.
Correct. The challenge is the timing of getting that information will be the spring. So you'll notice on slide 16, I have spring of 2020. So we know our enrollment, of course, you know, for the PEAM snapshot, but we don't know the charters until spring. That's when we get that documented.
Gotcha. And so I think the other aspect, so this would take into account kids that are in charter schools currently that live in our boundary.
Correct.
So I like A by far the most on this. I think I like the idea of this, and I like the idea if we could do it with private, but again, this is something that we can't change right now unless we convince them to leave their charter schools and come to us in the middle of the year.
Correct.
Whereas for A, we can do something about for next year, and it may not be, none of these are perfect metrics, but that is clear, understandable, meaningful, and we can do something about it now in our recruiting and talking to parents and whatnot by next year. So my push on this would be for 4A. I think we can look at the other ones as we go forward, et cetera, but for this year, 4A.
Trustee Garcia.
Yeah, I mean, I hear entirely where Trustee Mackey is going with point 4A. I think what's exciting about 4A too is if that becomes the trend that we stabilize enrollment and enrollment stays as it is, then market share then becomes a more viable goal to look into in further years because we set these annually. And so if it then becomes a trend that we stabilize our enrollment at the beginning of the year, and we know that that's not the trend to keep projecting downward, then market share becomes more viable. If I'm reading the numbers correctly for 4C, is it not safe to say that we have more students who are either in private or homeschooled than are in charters?
No.
Okay,
We have far more in charter than we do in private or home.
okay,
One of the things to note is that private school numbers really haven't changed over the number of seats that are at private schools is actually very steady.
Whereas
You
in
don't
fact, the
see, whereas charters,
seats
correct,
continue to
exactly.
increase.
They can proliferate, whereas, you know, running a school is expensive on the private end. And so it's not like anybody's just I'm gonna open up a private school. Charters, you know, are receiving additional funding. The commissioner now allowed open enrollment for expansion of open enrollment. So therefore, they can find a spot and put up a new building, and so it's far larger.
Trustee Garcia, I'm looking at a chart here, and we're at a little over 21,000 at private. So if I go back to 2015-16, we're a little over 18,000, and 2018-19, a little over 21,000.
Yes, Dr. Hinojosa.
Okay, let's go to A, so I can weigh in. I like A, it's simple, it's clear, and we would be bucking the trend. We still lost 1,000 kids this year, and even though we projected that we were gonna lose 1,800, we lost 1,000, but we made an 800 student gain. And on top of that, 300 of those were because of Head Start. So this is actually a reasonable goal to have. Go to the next slide. And you see why. You see that it would buck the trend, and it would help the district, would have more resources. So I can live with A. Let me see if there's anything on that last slide that I want. Like Trustee Mitchke said, everybody's hemorrhaging, although Aldine had a blip, but then I think Austin went up this year. So there are a few little factors, but everybody else, even like Plano, because they're aging out, and not necessarily charters or privates, but they're aging out. So this is an impact. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. This one is, you're right, but what changed this is the bottom number. The 238, that's the one that went up. Let me tell you right now, I'm on the North Texas Commission. Every 4 minutes, somebody's moving into North Texas. They're moving into Frisco, and they may be coming from San Francisco, but they're not coming here. But now Uber coming downtown, they could add more families, but actually, so where are they going? And I think some of them are choosing private. The ones that have resources that come here from other states that have capital, I think I saw one number before where privates actually did go up a little bit, because those are the parents of agency, and the parents of agency aren't necessarily picking us. They're not here for Discover Dallas ISD. And they get here, they just go with word of mouth and who someone told them, this is where you got to go to school. So this one is less, and it's less precise. And like it's an estimate. So I do also have, when you're putting this kind of stake on it, you got to make sure that your data is pristine, because someone's going to question it. Let's go to the next one. I can live with this one because it's also a target on something we can probably do something about, because this is who we're losing kids to, and if we can get them back, I could live with this. This is not perfect, like Trustee Mitchke said, but I can live with it. Go to the next slide. And so we're making progress from where we were. They're still, but see, we have very little control over this too. If the state starts just authorizing KIP and ILT and Uplift to add more campuses, they're adding more buildings, and they can throw them up quickly. We're having to repurpose schools. We're having to close under-enrolled schools. We're having to go out for a bond election. And so we had 4,000 parents that don't go to Dallas ISD that applied to go to us, but they only wanted to go to the specialty schools. Now that we're doing more with our neighborhood schools, now we're going to start getting more with them. But this is also, I can live with this one. It's not perfect, just like Dan said. Number one is more clear. A is more clear and precise, and you would be making a big difference. And even there's a caution there. The new families that are coming in, they're not picking us, obviously. So I think one is safer. C is more aggressive and assertive. So whatever the board decides, I could live with any of these because this is a high priority. But I can argue all three of them. I think B is the one I feel less confident with because it's an estimate. And that's just kind of my perspective.
Dr. Hinojosa, can I ask a clarifying question? So the one point that I'm curious your perspective on is the fact that this one would be based on spring data from this year versus PEMS that would be based on next year's data.
Yeah, when Pam brought this one to me, I said, man, I feel real uncomfortable. We do everything, we do all our numbers by December, and now we got to wait a few more months to get the data. That gave me a little pause, but it's attacking the right competition. So I said, I guess I can live with that and wait a few more months to see if we got it or not. That one was not a deal breaker for me. It didn't make me feel a little uncomfortable.
Trustee Garcia.
And the point about the neighborhood schools becoming even more compelling to our own community so that they're not leaving to the charters is what really, I think the aggressiveness of 4C is very exciting to think about. That as more and more of our schools become the premier choice for their students and not the one down the street, not the KIP or the something down the street. This one, I think, has a lot of merit, looking into the communities from which the charters are coming to, being mostly District 4 and District 5 and others, but it's exciting to see how competitive our neighborhood schools will become as relative market share compared to the charter schools. So 4C has a very aggressive merit to it as well.
Sorry,
Trustee Mackey.
can I ask one more question? And I mean, I think the other thing, and I'm just curious if anyone else has thoughts on this, and Dr. Hinojosa, you kind of answered this, but I don't know if you got to what I was asking, that 4C is already done. People are in these schools. We're going to find out in the spring how much we did previously.
Yeah.
Whereas 4A is not done. We have the rest of this year that we can work to impact that. Does anyone have any thoughts, and Dr. Hinojosa specifically, or administration, about that difference in this?
Well, I'd like to add actually to what Trustee Garcia said, because in 4A, the only way we can buck this trend is by making neighborhood schools attractive. So you actually can capture that here as well, because to Dr. Hinojosa's point, and Trustee Mackey lived it as a principal, there are only certain number of seats at the specialty schools, period. Whereas, and those are filled. So the only way to, so that, those in and of themselves are not gonna make a difference in 4A, right? I mean, we fill TAG and we fill SEM and we fill, those are filled. It's our neighborhood schools where that's the only way we're gonna buck this trend. So it, to a large extent, it's also in 4A.
Well, let me comment a little bit on what's been said. It's not only a question of making our neighborhood schools better. It's a question, also a question of fighting harder. Mm-hmm. Okay, our schools are better than the vast majority of the charter schools. Mm-hmm. Are we incentivized to fight for those kids by getting that information out in every possible way? You know, are we cherry picking some really bad charter schools that are not doing a good job? Are we going directly to every one of those kids and families? Because those kids are really going to lose out. I mean, it's one thing for a child to be in a charter school that is performing at an A or B level. Those kids are not being harmed. But the kids whose families have been seduced to go into these charter schools that are performing at a D or an F level, have we targeted those schools? Have we gone out and said, okay, we have a strategic plan to make sure that those kids who are suffering in F charter schools, in D charter schools, have we specially focused on them? I don't think so. And that's why I want, my preference is to focus the attention of this district on being more competitive, not only in just improving the quality of our schools, which we have done. And it's to the great, credit and tribute to the superintendent and the entire administration, all of our teachers and principals for getting us there. But we are in a situation where no matter how much we've improved, the charter schools are still making gains every single year. And our enrollment is going down every single year. So the reason why I do not like the first incentive is if our enrollment goes up, it may just go up because 5,000 families move into Dallas ISD and 4,000 of the kids go to charter schools and 1,000 come to us, and our enrollment will have gone up under that situation. Not having to do anything, not having to be incentivized to be a better competitor. It just happens. And when you look at market share, there's nothing about it just happens. It's about, how are we competing, both in terms of having quality schools and going out and making sure that we're not sitting back and letting the charter schools go out there and take more and more kids. It is a goal that is, or an incentive that is rigorous, because no one has really been able to overcome the challenges that the charter schools have made to us as a result of the advantages that they have in being able to move around and having larger budgets and so forth. And specific people on their staff whose job it is to market Dallas ISD to the families of our kids. We don't have that. And that's why I think enrollment is just, well, it might happen. It might happen as a result of the good things we're doing, but it's not making us do anything. And it's not making us work harder to deal with the competition. It might be a byproduct of us working harder. Yes, Dr. Enos.
I definitely agree with your overall premise. I agree with your comments, but I can't let it go. I mean, nobody else has rocked the block where we go to apartments in these highly charter enrolled districts, and we actually sit there on Saturday and all weekend, and we actively recruit the parents of charter schools. We do open records requests on charter schools. We aggressively go after them. No other district that I know has all the collateral and all the marketing materials that we have. Nobody. I work with every urban district on a regular basis. Your overall premise is accurate. We're not winning that war, but I don't want it to be said in a public meeting that we're not working hard, because our people are just, and it's not just Tony's team, it's Angie's team, it's Brian's team, it's the magnet school people. Everybody's working hard to get those kids. So I just don't, your overall premise is right. We're not winning this war, but it's not because we're not trying and we're just not being effective.
Okay, well, I will accept that, that qualification. That wasn't my intent. I know we're working hard. My point is that when we're comparing these two goals, one of them on enrollment, you can get there just by some fortuitous circumstance, like a big company moves into Dallas. And the other one you can only get as a result of winning the war. And so that's my point, is that the third alternative is the one that actually is more focused on rewarding the winning of the war. The other one, to a certain extent, does that, because you can increase enrollment by winning the war, but you can also have enrollment increases for, reasons that have nothing to do with fighting the war.
So, I can see it either way. The 2 points I would make on that is that I don't agree with the premise that A, we don't do anything about it, doesn't change if we don't focus on it, but C makes us do things differently. I think, to Dr. Hinojos' point, I think both of those can only be done by working hard at that, and the strategy of it changes. While this one is explicitly charged, I think, to Dr. Hinojos' point, we are still doing that and recruiting that, and et cetera, and they are both tightly linked. So I don't know if I buy that premise, and I also don't buy the premise that A can just happen out of nature and something happens, and C couldn't, because C definitely could as well. If a charter school gets shut down, if something changes, et cetera, things can change on that also. Not to say your points aren't valid in that. I want to go back to the same point that bothers me about C as it's currently written, is that this is already done. There is nothing we can do in this district right now to materially change this from what it is right now. That number is out there. We'll know it in the spring, but there's nothing we can do to change that. So I would actually be more compelled, and I know this puts it on a delay of deciding whether we've met this or not. I would be more compelled by this goal if it was comparing spring 2021 to the spring 2020 numbers, because that gives the entire next year and all the way through summer to recruit. So that's the way to measure what we're doing right now this year. This is measuring what happened last year, which is not compelling to me for an incentive goal this year. So those are my thoughts. I mean, I can see either of those. I'd be curious on a reaction on that. I think this is one of those pieces that, I don't know if we're going to get to an exact one that everyone agrees on here. So I'm wondering, and maybe this is something possible, maybe we can talk about, it sounds like nobody loves 4B here in the way it's currently written. I think some of the points that Dr. Hinojosa mentioned about that are valid, is if we look at 4A and 4C and bring both of those for a conversation at the board level and then take a vote on one of them there. That would be my thought going forward.
Anybody else?
Where I'd be, I mean, just genuinely curious, I genuinely see both, is how would going after A or going after C be any different in the way that you're going to try to win the war? Curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, from the school perspective, the only way so theoretically, I certainly understand Trustee Mitchke's point about all these kids could move into the district, only that hasn't happened in the entire time I've been in the district. So I just, but-
We did have an enrollment increase in the 2014-2015 timeframe. Our enrollment actually went up. And if you go back and check that data, and at that point in time, we weren't having the kind of performance that we've had since that period of time. But probably somebody can Google this on their phone, but
No, I think it's in one of the, there was, yeah, I remember the 20, but in the last 5 years, right, and all the demographers have told us
right.
that's just not going to happen. But none of the schools are sitting thinking, let me put it this way, there's not a principal in our district that is thinking it's just going to happen, right? None of us think that. None of us think that that's what's happening. I mean, our principals, whether it's 4A or whether it's 4C, we do in fact look at schools that have a neighboring charter school that has taken a large percentage of our kids. And we do put out like targeted mailers to those kids at those schools. We do rock the block in those neighborhoods. We have principals, teachers, community liaisons that go with Tony and her group, and sometimes just Tony and her group, because our group is like trying to do another event, but knocking on apartment doors. We have the rock the blocks that Tony put together at the apartment complexes. It's very difficult, and we haven't figured out why. There's no way that I can say we've figured it out. We are going to continue to, okay, that didn't seem to give us the kind of return, if you will, on the amount of time and investment. What else can we do? Right now, we're doing preview nights through Tony's Discover Dallas. So neighborhood schools are open for parents to come and visit on particular evenings so that they're also prepared. I know there's still a variety of ideas Tony has prepared for us that we can work together to execute. To Dr. Hinojosa's point, when we say it hasn't worked to give us more kids than what we've had. To some extent, it is starting to appear that it's working because we did lose less kids than we were projected to lose. So
Right.
It's a combination of things. We just don't know if we've hit that tipping point where maybe now they're going to, have we hit that point where we've now communicated more about the success of our schools that people will start to come? That's yet to be determined.
I want to add something else to answer Trustee Garcia's question. What are we going to do and what can we do? One of it is I'm very concerned about our bond because the number now has gotten so big. And one of the things that I really wanted was to modernize every school because a lot of these parents pick the uplift that's right there on I-30 in Ferguson because it's a nice new building. But yet our bond number has gotten so big. When are we ever going to get to make our schools look like that uplift right there on I-30 and on I-35? That's one. Second one is some parents choose the charters because they have after-school care. Well, if we are smart on how we try to capitalize on House Bill 3, extended school year, extended school time, and maybe we can figure out a few things and start with pilot schools that now are competing on an equal foot as a charter school. Yes, you can pick up your kid at 6 o'clock because we have arts after school and we've reworked the schedule to get our minutes and now we have this So that's another vehicle. But none of those are going to happen, to Trustee Mackey's point, they're not going to happen now. It may not happen for 2 or 3 years, but if we don't start doing something about them now, we're not going to impact it to it. That's why I wanted a 5-year contract, so we can be in this for the long game. And things that we start measuring now will pay off in the long game. So and there are other reasons why parents choose charters over us. It's a nice uniform. How many of our schools do we still have kids that have little stains on their uniforms? Do we invest in maybe not just the specialty schools having nice uniforms? Because the specialty schools have nice uniforms, but not our neighborhood schools, and they compete. They're the ones that are most vulnerable to if we're going to talk about equity, but that is a fiscal note. Are we going to talk about strategy there? So all of those things matter. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it was a salient point that we have to do all of those things and more, and we've got to focus on this bond. What is the most important thing to us? Is it to get kids industry credentials, which they can't get at a charter school? So those are some of the other thoughts, Trustee Mitchgate.
Okay, so going back to the enrollment goal, the 4A alternative, the other problem I have with that is that if enrollment just drops in the city of Dallas or the jurisdiction of Dallas ISD, if it just drops, if that's what the demographers are telling us, that means that the goal is not really going to be attainable, even if we increase our market share. That's the hypothetical we wind up with. 5,000, 10,000 kids leave the Dallas ISD region, right? What happens then? We're not going to get to a point where we're increasing enrollment no matter what we do. But if we've increased our market share, then the superintendent's incentive should kick in. That's another reason why I think 4C matters. It also sends a signal to the public. We're out there. And anyway, I realize people have different viewpoints on it. I'm not worried about the time lag. We should lag the goal to match up with the time period that gives us a chance to do something about it. I don't think there's anything in our in the superintendent's contract that requires that an incentive goal be stuck in to a particular calendar year or school year period. But we can pick the dates. And there's nothing that requires us to have any incentive goals. We can have up to 7. So it seems to me we can have one that straddles, if it makes sense. It straddles 2 school years or straddles 2 calendar years. But I mean, I looked at the enrollment one for a long time, and it seemed to me to not be as focused on dealing with our competition. So it doesn't appear that we have a consensus, on this. Trustee Mackey threw out the idea of we let the board decide on 4A or 4C, and we send them both up. Trustee Garcia, any thoughts on that?
Would agree that the vote by the board would just give us more diversity of opinions. Would agree that we're not speaking at least the same preference within this committee alone. So subject to vote for the board would make more sense.
And Dr. Hinosa, your point of view is you could live with either one.
I could live with either one, and I know for a fact the other 6 board members are going to have strong opinions on this A and C. So it'll give us some guidance, because some of y'all can live with either one, some of you prefer the other one, but I think the rest of the board will help inform a better decision.
Yeah, and again, I could live with either one. I see pros and cons. I think there's value in them. Are there any concerns about bringing both of them to the board and facilitating that discussion and going there?
No, I anticipate that meeting on November 21st, it's a call board meeting on the same day as the regular meeting, 3 p.m. I expect that there'd be some robust discussion about the incentive provisions of the contract. So if I understand it, are you, we have a consensus of this committee on the first three, and we have a consensus on this committee that 4B is not what we want to do. The superintendent is also in agreement with what I've said so far. And so I think what we would need would be a motion to,
One note on that, though, is is there a consensus on this board to lag this charter goal at 4C to be spring 2020 to spring 2021, so we can do something about it in this current year?
Now that's where that's where this makes more sense to me. 4C then jumps in just my ability to see and reason where it plays into this. If it concerns what we can do, as Trustee Mackey
Right.
said, throughout the summer and later into the school year. But that's exactly right.
yes,
I have a question about that.
Yep.
And maybe not all my thoughts are connecting since I'm old and I've been up for a long time. But actually, we wouldn't get this, okay, as a conversation came up about my compensation is already done for the current year. As my new evaluations come in, that's for the future year. This is also data that was an incentive plan that we're setting up for the future to be rewarded. So tell me, and to me, if we get to 2020 and we actually did stuff last year, all the stuff my team did and it worked, and we actually beat the charters, what's wrong with that? So I'm just trying to, I think my team and I probably need to lay out before next week, is lay out a timeline with Cecilia about, this is the effective date, this is when it happened, this is when we're gonna get the results. I think we just need to map this out on a chart and then have that available for the discussion. That's my only point, because really the bottom line is we want more kids. It doesn't matter if we're getting rewarded for what we did last year, as long as the kids come. But remember, this is not gonna get rewarded for another 18 months. It won't, I mean, especially if we go to a spring number.
Right.
So let's just map all that out, let's put it together so that we can see it visually, because right now we're talking in concepts.
yeah, well, maybe this is a way to deal with that complexity, that the Dallas ISD market share for district and enrolled residents will, sorry, you just changed the thing on me. Will stabilize I'm sorry, in 2021, will exceed, in the spring of 2021, will exceed the Dallas ISD market share as measured in the spring of 2020.
There you go. That helps. That helps me in my thinking. Let us map that. Let's add that as an addendum. Let's add that as an addendum and then see how it works on a visual map. And I think that maybe get to what we're all trying to figure out. Yeah.
Please go ahead, Mr.
I move to bring the incentive plan to the board for a vote with goals 1, or incentives 1, 2, and 3 as written, and incentive 4, bringing 4A and 4C for board discussion and final determination.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to hold on there. Our parliamentarian said we're not posted for this, to take action on this. So, okay,
We
we've,
understand the intent and will comply.
okay. Okay. We're not posted for the action, but there's no need for the action based on the discussion that we have, and there will actually be a vote by the board on what we have discussed. So the time is now 6:35 p.m., and we are adjourned. Thank you all.